Young diver Chris Lemons tells his fiancée, Morag, that he's expected on the ship tomorrow and will be gone for a whole month. She's deeply worried about him. Chris comforts her and gives her a kiss. Chris arrives at the ship in the port of Aberdeen, where he's greeted by Duncan Alcock, an experienced leader of the deep-sea diving team. Duncan informs him that they have a new ship captain. Chris hopes the new captain won't cancel their Christmas break. In the locker room, a crew member tells Chris that the ship has a legendary diver nicknamed Vulcan. He says Chris will have a blast working with him. Next, the dive supervisor, Craig, briefs the divers, explaining that they'll live in decompression chambers for 28 days and perform dives. Their mission is to replace a gas pipeline at the bottom of the North Sea. The divers are split into 3 teams of 3. Chris is teamed up with Duncan and David Uasa, nicknamed Vulcan. Chris greets David, but David isn't in the mood to chat. Then Duncan tells Dave that he mentored the young diver during his first 5 dives, adding that, as everyone knows, he's an awesome mentor. In the decompression chamber, Chris looks at a photo of Morag. Dave gives him advice. Forget everything left on land to avoid distractions. Their capsule is sealed, and an oxygen-helium mix is pumped in to help the divers gradually adjust to the pressure at the sea floor. The ship sets sail and heads toward its destination. Along the way, Craig checks in with the divers over the radio, joking around. With a grin, he reminds them that if they leave the chambers before decompression, their internal organs will explode. During dinner, Duncan tells the team that he's being sent into retirement, and this is his last dive. He's clearly saddened by it. Before bed, Chris smiles as he watches a video message from Morag. When the ship reaches the dive site, a storm kicks up. The captain has doubts about proceeding. Craig says it's risky, but storms are common in the North Sea. The crew activates the ship's dynamic positioning system to keep it steady despite the storm, using automated steering. The divers are told everything is ready for the dive. They grab their gear and move to the diving bell for descent. The bell is lowered into the water to a depth of 90 meters. The captain and Craig monitor the dive via an underwater drone's camera. Dave and Chris put on diving suits connected to hoses supplying an oxygen-helium mix for breathing at depth. David dives first, with Chris following. Duncan stays in the bell. Chris reaches the seafloor but can't see Dave due to near-zero visibility. He asks Duncan for directions and Duncan responds after a slight delay, making Chris nervous. Suddenly, Dave appears and leads Chris forward. The ship lowers a power cable to the divers and they connect it to the gas pumping system. Chris navigates between pipes to check the sensors deep within the system. Unexpectedly, the ship's dynamic positioning system fails, cutting off power. The ship loses control and starts moving. Noticing this, Dave urgently orders Chris to get out of the system. Chris escapes, and the divers climb onto the rig. In the rush, Chris doesn't notice that his hose gets tangled in the pipes. The hose tightens, pulling him downward. It gets pinched, cutting off his air supply. He switches to his backup tanks, which have only 10 minutes of air. Dave tells Chris the hose is about to snap and that he needs to return to the rig, or Dave won't be able to find him. The hose breaks and Chris is thrown back. The ship drifts away. David climbs back to the bell using his hose. Chris's severed hose floats past him. Duncan pulls Chris's broken hose into the bell, stunned by what's happened. Craig tells the captain they need to drop anchor to avoid drifting too far from the diver. The captain refuses, saying there are too many pipelines below, and he won't risk causing an environmental disaster. Chris lights a flare to look around. He tries to contact the team, but there's no response. His radio is dead, and his compass is broken. He starts searching for the gas rig in complete darkness. The engine room reports that the engines are fine. The captain decides to take manual control, despite the danger. Together with the first officer, they begin maneuvering the ship through the waves. Meanwhile, Chris spots the rig. He climbs its wall, gripping onto openings and using up his dwindling air supply. Through sheer willpower, he makes it to the top of the platform. But oxygen deprivation sets in, and he recalls Morag's words about how worried she was for him. Tears well up in his eyes, and he passes out. He lies alone on the platform, with only seconds of air left in his tanks. Dave assumes Chris's air has run out and that they need to search for his body. Duncan disagrees. The underwater drone's connection is restored, and Craig orders the operator to search for the diver. They find Chris, his limbs twitching in convulsions. He's still alive, but not breathing. It's been 7 minutes without oxygen. Meanwhile, the dynamic positioning operator heads to the server room and tells the captain he can restore the system by manually reconnecting all the cables. The captain gives the go-ahead. Craig suggests using the drone to grab Chris and takes over the controls himself, taking responsibility. After several attempts, he manages to hook the drone onto Chris's carabiner. Salvation seems near, but before losing consciousness, Chris had clipped his carabiner to the platform to avoid being swept away. The drone can't lift him. It's now 16 minutes without oxygen. Duncan recalls meeting Chris. They once searched for a sunken fishing boat together. They never found the last body, likely swept away by the current. The search was called off because it was too expensive. The man's wife was given a shoebox with his locker's contents. Duncan is devastated and doesn't want to hand Morag a box of Chris's belongings. Dave insists they'll find him. The dynamic positioning operator reconnects the cables one by one and restarts the system. The autopilot is engaged, and the ship heads back to the dive site. Craig informs Duncan that Chris is on the platform. The ship is stabilized, and David dives to retrieve him. He clips Chris to himself and crawls back to the bell, carrying the extra weight. Due to the raging storm, the ship dips in the waves and the bell suddenly drops. David manages to push Chris off the platform just in time, saving him from the falling bell. With superhuman effort, Dave drags Chris upward. He's out of strength, but Duncan motivates him. "You can do it! One last push!" Dave summons his willpower and succeeds, pulling Chris onto the platform. Once Chris is in the bell, Duncan begins CPR. Chris is pale and blue, having been without oxygen for 30 minutes, but then a miracle happens. Chris breathes. He doesn't regain consciousness, and his gaze suggests his brain isn't fully functioning. Dave tells him, "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Nothing happens, and they mourn him. A moment later, Chris speaks. Duncan reports to the bridge that Chris is conscious and talking. The entire crew cheers and embraces. Craig tells the captain he's a hero for not letting the storm carry the ship away. In the decompression chamber, Dave checks Chris and says his pulse is normal. Chris feels he let Morag down, having promised her he'd be fine. He thanks his partner for saving him. After 2 days of decompression, Chris calls Morag and tells her the mission was cancelled and he'll be home soon. Back at the port, Duncan and Chris say goodbye. Duncan stays in the decompression chamber and tells Craig he's not ready to retire yet. Chris returns home where Morag greets him. They hug tightly, and she asks if everything's okay. Chris admits there was an accident, and one diver got stuck on the seafloor. Morag immediately realizes it was him. She's shocked. Chris says he knew he'd make it back to her. They confess their love and kiss. On-screen text recounts the real events of 2012. Chris Lemons survived 29 minutes without oxygen, with no impact on his physical or mental health. This may have been due to a unique combination of depth and temperature. Experts still can't explain how he survived. Archival footage of Chris and Morag's wedding follows. Chris jokes that someone probably isn't thrilled about it. He's one of 2 people who kissed him on the lips. In the crowd, a blushing Duncan sits. 3 weeks after the incident, Chris, Dave, and Duncan return to the North Sea to finish what they started. Write in the comments what you thought of the movie. Like and subscribe to the channel.